I texted myself this note. The middle of the story is the hardest. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about when you're in the middle of a goal or the middle of a story or just in the middle where you've been trudging through and working towards something, but you haven't turned that corner. You haven't really seen the fruits yet. And you want to keep going. You want to keep doing the things, but the motivation, the excitement, it's worn off and you're not seeing the results yet. And so it's that just trudging part where you just need to keep putting one step in front of the other. And yet it is the hardest part of the whole journey. So that's what I want to talk about today. We're really good at talking about the beginning, talking about when you have that burst of motivation and excitement because you've been inspired and you've seen the vision and you've seen and imagined what could be possible. And there's all of just that goodness running through you and you're ready and you make the commitment and you take the action. We're also really, really good about talking about the end, talking about once you've reached, once you've achieved, once you've made it to the finish line and oh, the excitement of that. We're not as good at talking about the middle because the middle isn't very glamorous. It's not very exciting. It's not as fun. And so the middle gets missed. And yet it's that middle that is the crucial step to getting us to the end. I mean, it's the middle that we have to learn how to do better if we're going to get any of those results that we want in any areas of our life. Because the truth is, goals are easy to start. They're harder to keep at. Seth Godin, he calls this the dip. It's that long grind between starting your goal and then getting to the finish line, getting to the success, getting to all the accolades. It's the middle where you have to put in all the work. So let's talk about how we can give ourselves every advantage possible in the middle. And I think it's going to be fun to look at this from two perspectives. The first is going to be from the perspective of productivity and achievement, right? Like what are actual steps that really can make the middle less messy, or at least just get us to keep going. But I also want to look at the middle of a story. Like think your favorite book, your favorite film or movie, right? Like that middle part, how they keep us in the middle and what middles really look like. All right, so let's begin with kind of the achievement perspective, the productivity perspective. I think one of the really critical steps is expecting the middle. Why do we not? Why don't we expect it? Why do we expect the start and the excitement and the motivation and all that? We expect the end when we're going to reach it, but for some reason, we are surprised when we're in that part where you don't feel like doing it. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel fun. You're a little unsure of if you're even doing the right things. And then we're so hard on ourselves for that part of the process, even though it's so obviously necessary. I mean, look at any great movie, any great book, any great story. There is this middle part that is messy and they slide backwards and then have to move forward. And usually someone new has to come in to show them a better way. I mean, that is the natural process. And yet we're surprised when it's our own. So the very first step, I think, is we really need to just normalize and expect the middle, this messy middle where it doesn't feel fun. It feels uncomfortable. It feels hard. It's not that great. And yet, how are we going to shift that and keep going? Okay, so let's now kind of get into that portion of it. I think we need to get really clear on our sticking points. One thing that always surprises me is how much we try to continue to force a process or force a specific set of steps of how we're going to get there, even when everything is pointing to the fact that it's not working for us. But maybe we heard that it worked for someone else. Someone else said, this is the way to do it. You have to do this. So we just force ourselves to keep doing it this certain way, even though it's just really not working and we're feeling really stuck. I mean, that's just the easiest way to say it. So I have found that one of the easiest, I mean, it's just so easy and yet powerful things we can do is just to question the process, to ask, what is it I'm having such a hard time with? And once you've identified that, okay, what can I do to make this easier? It's really that simple of a question. What can I do to make this easier? Is it that you need a little bit more education in an area? It's just confusing. You need to do a little more research. Do you need help? Do you need someone else to come in and give you some guidance, give you some answers? Do you need to just change up the thing that you're doing because it's feeling stagnant? It's feeling stale. You need to just give it some zhuzh, right? Like you need to give it a little something, something. And that brings me to infusing the fun. The beginning is fun because we're excited, because we're catching the vision. The end is fun because we got there. We made it happen. We get to celebrate. The middle deserves to have a little bit of fun too. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be all fun. Of course it's not. I know that. But sometimes we're just sticking with one way of doing things and it feels like drudgery. I mean, it just feels so negative, and we're sticking with this idea that this is how it has to be, and it doesn't. We can infuse the fun. I really think that this is probably most prevalent in exercise. We've been doing it a certain way. We keep feeling we have to do it this way, even though we're loathing the entire experience. And it's like, well, change up the class, change up the coach, change up the method, change up something, and find a way to make it fun. Even if it's just for a while, even if you're going to go back to the other thing you're doing because you really feel like that's where the gains are going to be, switch it up long enough to get inspired to go back. I think that within our businesses, the same thing applies. Within our relationship, the same thing can apply. Sometimes we need to just switch it all up and infuse some fun. And you're going to have to figure out and know, what is your motivation? Do you get motivated by goal? Do you get motivated by affirmation? Do you get motivated in some other way? And utilize that. Use it to your advantage. I also have been thinking about how, again, checking in with ourselves. And so often we're just feeling a little bit of confusion. We need a little bit more information to feel confident so that we can keep moving forward. Whenever you're unconfident if what you're doing is actually working, if it's actually getting you there, of course, you're going to have all this resistance that's like, why are we even doing this? What's the point? Why am I going to show up? So demystify the target. You know what the goal is. You know what you want. You know what you're trying to achieve, whether we're talking about our business, our relationships, our finances, our health. I mean, in any area, you can conjure up this vision of what you want. What's so hard is figuring out, okay, well, how do I get there though? What does the path look like? You know, we want to be able to put in to our navigation in our phone, this goal. And then it's like step, 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 step. Perfect. The same way when you're trying to get to a new location you've never been to, you put it in and it's just going to map you there. That's what we ultimately want. And there are versions of that are possible, right? That's why we invest in education. Someone's already been there. They're going to show us the path. But also we need to be willing to simplify, to do that research, to get the education, to figure out what the parts are that we're missing that are keeping us from that goal. And I really do think, I can't stress enough, like, look for the simplest way. I have a tendency to think that the more complicated it is, the more accurate it must be. Oh, if it's hard, it must be right. But actually, as I'm getting older, as I'm learning more and more, I'm realizing the simplest path is often the best one. And if for no other reason, because the simpler I keep it, the more of a chance I have of staying on it, the more complicated and hard I make it on myself, the higher my chances of quitting, of giving up, of convincing myself that I don't really need to keep going. So if we can re-examine the plan, the schedule, the process, whatever needs to be re-examined and adapt, our chances of making that middle work for us are going to exponentially expound. If we are stuck in this idea that we have to do it a certain way, even when that certain way does not seem to be working, it's going to mess with us. And I think what's so fascinating is that sometimes we just have to accept that it was working for a really long time and now it's not. That was one of the hardest things for me in my own business to accept and to acknowledge, was that things that had worked for so long don't work anymore. And yet I kept trying to go back to them. I kept trying to fall into them. And it's like, no, it's not working. I've seen the same thing in certain exercise programs that I've done for years. And I loved them and I love the results. And you know what? It's just not working anymore. And it's not that the program isn't working. It's that it just doesn't work for me. I've seen it too many times. There's no novelty left. Or I've gotten a little bit just tired of the same old, and I need to just freshen it all up, twist everything around, give it novelty. And it really does make such an impact. And that brings me to the stories that we're telling ourselves. We need to examine these stories, these beliefs that go around things like, I'm not good at this. I'm so tired of doing this. Insert, oh, I can't do it that way because I'm not a morning person, or I'm not a night person, or I wouldn't be available, or whatever it is. Do you really want to keep that thought? We are letting so many thoughts in that are not serving us. And our thoughts have so much power. I have been really checking in with myself lately. It's been just such a different and unique period of time for me that I'm not used to. It's very different. For so much of the last 16 years, my world has been these huge goals all around my business. And right now, my business is absolutely on the back burner because my family needs me so much right now. And it's all good. It's just, there's just so much. And I've really had to check in with these stories that I tell myself and check in and be like, do I actually want to keep that thought? Do I want to put that out there? Do I want to be saying those things? And realizing, yeah, no, I don't want to keep that thought. And then that last step is keeping your eye on the prize, on that goal, on that vision. And you have to figure out how that works for you. For some, it's writing it down every single day. They rewrite that goal. For another, it's looking at the vision board, looking at those visual cues that they're looking at that just, yes. And for others, it's sitting for a few moments and actually imagining, closing your eyes, imagining that it's happened. But you have to figure out what it is for you. What is your way of doing it? Heck, if you're not sure, just do all three. Okay. Just go all three. Don't overcomplicate by being like, I have to figure this out. Which one is it? No, you don't. Just do all three. Okay. Like, take 1 minute and write out the goal. Take 1 more minute, visualize that Pinterest board or that pin board or whatever it is. And then take 1 more minute and just close your eyes and sit in it. 3 minutes total every single day. But we have to keep reminding ourselves what we want and why we want it. I have shared with you guys, and I've talked about how much I want to learn Spanish. And you know what? I'm in the messy middle right now. Like, that's the honest truth. And maybe that's why I wanted to talk about this with you today, because maybe you're there too. The middle of the story is the hardest. I was so inspired and so motivated at the beginning, and I was doing really, really good, not allowing myself to miss a day. I was kind of gamifying for myself by being like, don't break the chain. Okay, 1 more day. I had an app so that I could see the little dots, and visually see myself doing it. And I got in this section where I just felt like I wasn't making any progress. People kept asking me, how is it going? And do you know what I kept saying? I kept saying, oh my gosh, so bad. I don't know why I was saying that, because actually in the beginning, it wasn't. Like, I was showing up every single day for a minimum of 30 minutes, often more. I was working on this. I was trying to make progress. And yes, it was slow. It was very slow, slower than I would like, but it was still progress. But I created a story, and I allowed myself to keep saying, oh man, not good. Oh, because I think my fear was that I was afraid they were going to start speaking to me in Spanish. I was afraid, and I had a few people do that, right? Like, they said something and I had no idea how to respond, like none. And so then I would feel embarrassed, and I'd feel, oh, see, I'm not doing good. So I just started saying, oh, not good, to try to avoid them trying to say something to me in Spanish. But what I really should have done is I should have stopped myself the first time I said it and said, do you want to keep that thought? No, that thought is not serving me. And I should have let it go. And so now I find myself where it's been weeks of, I would say I've maybe made 5% effort towards Spanish over weeks. In other words, like, I don't even know if we can say 5%. I think two days out of a month, I've worked on Spanish. I mean, just really, really, really not working towards the goal. And so I'm trying to take this moment again, and I'm trying to say, okay, why do you want this? I know exactly why I want it, because my oldest, who is serving a mission right now, she is learning Spanish, and I want to be able to speak Spanish to her when she comes home. I also want it because I read once, and if this isn't true, please, no one correct me, because I need to just believe it. But I read once that learning a second language can offset dementia and Alzheimer's and different of those things that can come by 10 years. And it's actually something that I have always been really afraid of. And so I'm like, oh, if that can help protect me, I'll do it. I also live in a community where I could use the Spanish language all the time, all the time. And I have big dreams to get to serve and help others. And having this language would help me do that. So there's my why. I know my why. Next, trying to visualize. I imagine myself just everyday life being able to hear someone in Spanish, to realize that's their native language, and to be able to just switch and to be able to speak with them in the language that they're most comfortable, that they feel like they can best communicate. And it makes my heart so happy to imagine that. I also imagine the fun side of, going to Mexico, going on vacations, all over, and having no problem communicating, having no problem talking with native speakers. And that makes me so happy. And, I have this vision board in front of me, and I'm realizing there is nothing about Spanish. I'm not exactly sure how to like put that in visual form, but I'm going to come up with something. I'm going to put it on there. And I am going to work on just every day, taking a minute, visualizing myself fluently speaking Spanish. There is this scene from Something's Gotta Give, which is one of my favorite movies. It's Jack Nicholson and Diane Keaton, Amanda Peet, and Keanu Reeves. Anyways, if you haven't seen it, will you please just take like little self-care couple hours for yourself and watch it? I love it. It makes me so happy. But there's this moment where they're at this farmer's market, and Diane Keaton's character is going to be purchasing some things, and she switches to French, and she orders everything in French, and Jack Nicholson's character is a little impressed, and, oh, she speaks French. And the daughter of this mom who had switched to French says, yeah, she does. And so do I, fluently. And just for me, like, because it's such a dream, because it's such a goal, that, like, it just stuck out to me. I'm like, I want to be able to do that. And so, like, finding those parts that help help inspire you. And taking that further, like, taking my own advice, figuring out why am I getting stuck? What isn't working for me? And giving myself permission to change it, giving myself permission to infuse some fun. In fact, today I downloaded a whole new playlist of music, all in Spanish. And I'm going to just start like having that on in background so I can just hear it. And I'm going to try to start watching more shows in Spanish. It's so interesting because, again, I have this natural tendency to believe like it's got to be hard, right? Like I need it to be hard because if it's not hard, surely it's not effective. And maybe that's not true. Maybe it doesn't have to be that way. So maybe what I really need is to infuse some more fun so that I keep going, so that I don't get discouraged. And then maybe I'll be ready to get back into some of those hard things that I think in my mind must be the most effective. All right. So to wrap this all up, when I was researching before pressing record, and I'm going to admit, I didn't research much. I just wanted to get on and just talk and share. But when I put in, like, I was thinking like, oh, the middle is so messy, the messy middle, like how to, and whatever I put in, it wasn't super clear. And so it brought up all these tips for like writing a book, like the middle of your novel. And so I was just glancing at them and seeing what they said. And I was laughing because I'm like, so much of this is true with our goals. It's actually kind of the same thing. So I wanted to share some of the tips that were given for writing the middle of a novel. And I want you to think about how they relate and how we can use them for rewriting the middle of our stories, whatever story we're in, whatever we're in where we get stuck, like how we can rewrite the middle of our own stories. So one of the tips was to change the location for new developments and challenges. And I'm like, amen. Like we need to change up our own locations just to freshen everything up and keep ourselves vibrant. I was thinking about when within my fitness, I've needed to change up the physical location sometimes, right? Like I go from like, oh, I'm outside and I'm doing I'm running, right? So I'm outside to I'm inside. Maybe for others, like changing gyms, like my husband and my daughter, they just changed gyms and, they were starting to get stuck. It was getting harder. The gym they were going to was a little bit further away. And there's one that's really close to our house and it doesn't have as good of equipment. It doesn't have all the things that they want, but it's 5 minutes instead of 15. And it's not even 5, probably it's like 2. And so, it's like change up that location and eventually they can go back. Like I was talking to my husband about it. I'm like, she's going to go to college in fall. You can go back to the further gym once she's gone. But if this makes it easier, because it's their cute thing they do together. I just love it. Like they go to their little gym buddies. They go to the gym together and it's their thing that they do. And it's like, if this will help you guys be able to go more because of schedules, like just do that for a while and then you can switch it up. So changing the location for new developments and new challenges. I was like, that's so good. It's so good for our personal. The next one that I really liked was, it's doing the inverse. So it said increase plot complication and obstacles. And I was like, to keep us engaged in a story, that makes perfect sense. But to keep us engaged in our goals, we need to literally swap that. We need to figure out how we decrease the complications and the obstacles, how we simplify, how we make it easier for ourselves. Another point that they made that I was like, oh, this is so good, is introduce interesting minor characters. And I was like, this is such a critical part of the messy middle. We need to introduce something new, whether that's maybe a new course or a new coach or a new thought, a new idea, a new book, a new podcast episode, a new person that we're talking to about it. And maybe we even need to remove a person or a thought or something because it's becoming a sticking point for us. So I really liked that. And then another idea was stay focused on eventual character goals. And ultimately that's what we were talking about, right? Like staying focused on your goal. How are you going to keep bringing yourself back to what you want and why you want it? And I really do think using all through. And I really do think that there's so much power in just choosing to use all three unless you absolutely know what your motivation is. So write the goal down, see the goal, visualize the goal. And I think those two, the first and the third, are the most important. Like if I was gonna let one go, it'd be maybe looking at one, unless you really know that looking at like a vision board is really helpful, but writing it down and then visualizing it, where you're actually closing your eyes and you're taking a minute to see yourself at that finish line version of yourself. So powerful. So this last one, I just thought it was funny because I'm like, do we sometimes need to just ask if there's a way to do this? It said, shorten the middle to move swiftly to resolution. We have all read that book where the middle's too long. The middle is way too long. There's this one author, and I really like her. I've read tons of her books, tons and tons, but the middle is always too long. The start is great. The end is fun. The middle is, there's always this point where I'm like, you could have cut out 50 pages easily. The middle is too long. And we've done that in a movie, right? Like that middle part where you're like, oh my gosh, why does this movie feel so long? With our goals, do we need to sometimes check and be like, is there a way to like get to swift resolution? Is there like a way to speed up this middle process? Sometimes there's not. That's the honest truth. Like some of our goals, it's like, look, you get there when you get there and that's the way it is. But sometimes we're just dragging our feet. We say, I want to accomplish, well, I'll give you an example. One of the things I want to do is I want to switch our offices around. Okay. So in our house, I have my office, which is upstairs. Then we have a basement area. There's another area. Now that one of the kids is gone and out of the house, that is just an open room. And we're playing with all these different ideas. Are we turning it into a workout room? Are we turning it into a theater room? Our son wanted it to be like a full arcade room. Like we're playing with all these ideas. Ultimately, what I realized is going to work best for us is, so my cute hubby loves to be by the family. He always wants to be next to all of us. And so he literally works at the kitchen table. He could work in his office, which is that downstairs room. It's like that had been his office and but he hated it because he felt so far away from everyone. I am the opposite. I can be in a cave, doesn't bother me at all because I just zone in. I like when I'm working, I just completely tunnel in. So it really truly does not bother me where I am. So I'm like, well, why don't you just take my office? And he kept feeling like, oh no, I'm not going to kick you out of your office. He would say things like, your office has windows, which the downstairs room has window too. It's just a small window and mine is huge. And I'm like, okay, but honestly, I never look out that window. In fact, the only thing I ever think about that window is, are people like looking in at me? Can they see me? Like that's it, just, I don't need it. And so I realized, you know what's going to work so much better, especially as we're coming in on summer and everyone's going to be home and he cannot be taking up the kitchen table. Like we're all going to want to be living and being in the house. So I was like, okay, well, what do I need to do? And I was overcomplicating. I was making it take a lot longer than it needed to. And I finally was like, all right, what do you want? And I'm like, well, I want to wallpaper one wall. I've already got the desk down there. And then I just need to bring everything down. And I'm going to have half of it be my office and half of it is going to be kind of worked out, like have my elliptical and those kind of things. And not even caring. There used to be the part of me was like, no, my office has to be all my office. And it's like, also I'm like, no, I don't care anymore. Like that was something that used to really matter to me. It doesn't anymore. Again, like checking in with myself with these stories. I hope that this kind of helps, just hearing like my real thought processes on some of these random things in my life. But that is just a silly example of, I was stretching out the middle too much. So I ordered the wallpapers like a week ago. So I think they should be arriving this week. And I'm just like taking action. Like, okay, let's wrap this up. Let's make this happen and get it all together. And it just feels so good because I was the equivalent of when I'm reading those books and I'm like, oh, it's dragging out and I needed to just speed it up. Okay. Those are my thoughts for today on the messy middle of whatever it is, your goal, life, relationships. I mean, there's this messy middle, and how do we bring in a little bit more meaning and a little bit more fun? I hope that this has helped you and that it's just gotten your wheels turning. I hope you'll have this conversation with a friend because we always are so much more powerful when we're together. So share this episode and then talk about it together. And if you love the Balancing Busy podcast, and I hope you do, then I would love to ask you to leave a 5-star review. And if there are things you'd love to see in this podcast or you think could make it better, then I'd love for you to send me a DM or an email. And you can find me, just go to balancingbusy.com. You will find me and reach out. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me. I believe that life is full, but it doesn't have to be frantic. And I want to help us have more meaning, more purpose, and more power in our everyday. And I hope this episode helped.